Ange Coniglio, for decades, has been the foremost authority on and advocate for the American Football League, maintaining its legacy through his Remember the AFL website and spurring many AFL historians to journey on their own to tell the tale of this groundbreaking league. From 1960 to 1969, the original 8 franchises, plus the 66 expansion Dolphins and 68 expansion Bengals, changed the face of American pro football. We tabletop sports simmers, football gamers love to replay the AFL teams, particularly the Super Bowls that never were from 1960 to 65, and of course the stunning Super Bowl III upset of the Colts by the Jets that achieved that elusive parity and respect the AFL craved and deserved. Now I'm looking at an original APBA football 1966 AFL set. Such was the skepticism about the American Football League that APBA didn't issue an AFL set until the 1964 season, and in its 5-point rating system didn't rate any player higher than 4 points, 5 being the highest point total a player can get. And such was the skepticism that the rules of the game were actually relaxed a bit so that the defenses weren't quite as strong with the AFL teams as opposed to the NFL teams. That has since been corrected, and AFL and NFL teams are now sold together, even with the never-before-issued 1960 to 1963 AFL sets. Those are now all recalculated and available from the APBA store. Let's just take a look at this 1966 AFL set. We'll start with the Super Bowl I representative Kansas City Chiefs, and right at the top is our own Lenny the Cool Dawson, 4 points. There's Gerald Wilson, your punter, Otis Slug Taylor, the great Jim Tyrer, Count Curtis McClinton. Great, great names. You remember those helmets. Johnny Robinson, those beaten-up helmets of the 60s Chiefs. Mike Garrett's, and E.J. Holub, and William Fraser, Buck Buchanan. You know, the cool thing about the original APBA AFL sets are the purple backs. Of course, now they follow the NFL scheme with the red backs. But to consider the legacy of Ange Coniglio, one can go to the book Remember the AFL by Dave Steidel, and I'll just read you the intro to give you a sense of how important Ange Coniglio is to American professional football history. And I highly recommend the book, packed with great, great photos and testimonials from none other than Lance Allworth and Fred Arbanas, some of the greatest players of all time. Now you can see the bumper sticker that Ange Coniglio created. According to Dave Steidel, Ange Coniglio is the godfather of American Football League history. He and his website, remembertheafl.com, were the inspiration and impetus that spurred me toward following my love for the AFL and writing this book. Ange was an invaluable resource, contact, and friend who revived my interest in the AFL and offered many kind words and leads that kept me going when it all seemed impossible. He's undoubtedly America's #1 AFL enthusiast and keeper of the flame. The Remember the AFL bumper sticker was created by Ange when he lobbied for retention of the league's identity. A copy of it is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Ange Coniglio turned 86 years old on August 21st. We reached out to him 3 days before his birthday to talk about the efforts of and legacy of his Remember the AFL page, his many interactions with some of the legends of the AFL, and his continuing efforts to ensure that the AFL indeed is not forgotten. He even went so far as to walk us through the character of all the AFL franchises, which is quite important to us tabletop sports gamers and football simmers, because we really like to capture the essence of these teams, the flavor of the teams, and how these teams and their players were used so that we can relive their exploits on the tabletop gridiron. So without further ado, Ange Coniglio.
Okay, so let's go.
All right.
AFL.
What led you to start Remember the AFL? What's its mission and what have been some of its achievements?
It all started with a web page of mine that I started, probably at least 20 years ago, called Remember the AFL. And that was, to my knowledge, the second website ever to feature the American Football League. And I was inspired by another website, which is no longer in existence, and I started my AFL. In fact, I have a family website, okay? And the AFL website started as a part of my family website, but my family website got so big that I decided to separate it. So now I have a separate Remember the AFL website, which has probably hundreds of pages. It has pages for every AFL team, every former AFL team. I have an AFL Hall of Fame, and every team has a list of players that I think belong in the AFL Hall of Fame, and a bio on a separate bio for those players, and for a lot of them, separate pages. And I continually add to those pages. So I'm an AFL fan. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. I'm an American Football League fan. I fought tooth and nail against not against the merger, but against the loss of the American Football League's identity after the merger. And I'm still fighting, and I'm still an AFL apologist to balance out all the NFL apologists that are out there. And I also am amazed at how 60 years later you can go on Facebook and get into an argument with somebody about whether Darryl LaMonica was a better quarterback than Jack Kemp. I mean, 60 years later. I think the American sports media misses this, goofs up on the way they represent the AFL. Yeah, it only existed for 10 years, but it had a huge influence on American professional football, and I'd like to do everything I can to keep it in the public eye.
You do a tremendous job, and I can attest to folks who are listening to the podcast that, I'm on the website right now, and I was checking out your Hall of Fame. It's extensive. The whole site is replete with great knowledge. I mean, if you were a fan of that series, Full Color Football, this site will really knock your socks off. I'm looking at a letter dated from December 1969. You wrote to, or a couple of letters, I guess, you wrote to Lamar Hunt and Ralph Wilson. So you definitely have a long-range involvement with these folks.
Yeah, I wrote to all of them, a variety of things as far as my writing experience. I wrote to all of them. They got tired of hearing me. I called them, too. I remember calling Wayne Valley of the Oakland Raiders, and those were days when people actually answered the phone, So I'm talking to Wayne Valley, and I know what it was. I think it was when the Raiders went to the Super Bowl II, and I just didn't think they were getting the proper coverage from the media. So I called, and when I said, "This is Ange Coniglio," he said, "Pesky little bastard, aren't you?" And I still count that as one of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten.
For sure.
I also remember writing to, this was back probably in 63 or 64, writing to all the NFL owners suggesting that there should be, I didn't call it a Super Bowl, but that there should be a championship game or a championship game series between the AFL and the NFL. And the interesting thing is that only 3 NFL owners answered me: Carol Rosenblum, Art Modell, and Pittsburgh, Baltimore.
The Rooneys, right?
I'm getting old. And, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Cleveland, right? The Rooneys.
Right.
Those are the three that answered me.
Wow.
And then 3 or 4 years later, they have the merger deal, and those three happened to, which I take to mean they were the most open-minded of the NFL owners. So yeah, I've bugged them for a long time. I feel that in 2009, the NFL finally recognized the 50th season anniversary of the AFL, and had a lot of throwback uniforms. They put out a lot of material, fan material that you could purchase. And though they never credited me, I believe that the fact that I made so much noise about it is the one reason why they decided to do that.
It's interesting. We're a tabletop sports gaming group, and we're going to be going back to Canton to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And we were there in 2013, and I remember they had a kind of a fairly small AFL section, Floyd Little's jerseys, some beat-up Chiefs helmets, those great helmets. I just wonder if you've kind of seen how the AFL might have gained a little more traction in the broader hall.
Well, I haven't been there lately. I have to tell you about that. Way back when, at one time, the hall had a pretty decent section. They had all the former AFL teams in the same part of the hall. All of them were identified with the AFL logo, and all of them had some history of the AFL. In fact, at one time, I had bumper stickers made, Remember the AFL, and I sold them to fans for $1 a piece, and I sent one to the Hall of Fame, and they actually put a mock-up of the rear bumper of a car and stuck my bumper sticker on it and had it up in one of the displays.
Yes.
Well, that was at least 20 years ago. Then slowly they remodeled the hall, and they got rid of any kind of what you would call a section for the AFL. And they might mention it within each team's section, but didn't really say much about the AFL. And then I was there before the pandemic when Johnny Robinson finally, years after he should have been, finally was inducted to the Hall of Fame. And there's no longer any section whatsoever that separately recognizes the AFL. They have one little section, believe it or not, that recognizes the USFL. I got nothing against the USFL, but to me it's a slap in the face that they have a USFL section and not an AFL section. So I'd be interested, and I complained, and I asked others to complain, and the response that I got was, well, we're remodeling, and we're really going to do a good job when we're done remodeling. So if you go, let me know whether they've done anything to really acknowledge the AFL.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now, take me back, if you will. When did you become a fan of American professional football, and what was that gear up to the launch of the AFL really like?
Okay, well, I'm 6 years old. My first professional football game was the Buffalo Bills versus the Cleveland Browns in the All-America Football Conference. I think I must have been maybe 10 or 12 years old. So the All-America Football Conference lasted for 4 years. And Buffalo was always second to the Browns. They always came in second to the Browns. Now they folded, and the NFL absorbed the 3 or 4 of the teams: the Browns, the 49ers, the Colts. That may be the only 3. Anyway, when that happened, there was a public bond raised in Buffalo to purchase a franchise in the NFL, and the NFL declined and did not want Buffalo in the NFL. So that sort of got my ire up. It was also interesting to me that Cleveland, the All-American Football Conference was ridiculed by the NFL, just like they ridiculed the AFL. and then Cleveland went into the NFL and kicked their butts for a couple decades after they went into that league.
Right.
So they were wrong then, and they were wrong with the AFL as well. So anyway, that was the early 50s, and Buffalo was without a major professional football league team until 1960. And when they started the Bills, I purchased my wife and I got season tickets, and were season ticket holders for many of the early years of the AFL. And I'm a big Bills fan. I was a big Bills fan. It's hard to explain to people how you can be a fan of a league, but because of the mocking and the neglect by the media, etc., by the NFL, I became an AFL fan as well. I mean, I just. I supported, quote, my league. I don't know how old you are. I don't know if you remember the Jets Gold Super Bowl. When the Jets won that Super Bowl, every AFL fan in America felt like their team won the game.
Sure.
And I think this is something that's lost. That was lost when they destroyed the identity of the AFL. When the Jets came to Buffalo the year after, let's see, this 1970, I guess it was the first year after they won the Super Bowl. They came to Buffalo. It was their away game. The Buffalo fans gave them a standing ovation. The Buffalo cheerleaders brought out a banner that said "World Champs" and gave it to the Jets. Where would you see that anywhere else? I mean, that's how strongly AFL fans felt about their league. The players themselves have made similar comments. Players from other teams than the Jets or the Chiefs who say, that was a vindication for all those players who for years were told they were playing in a Mickey Mouse league, that they weren't, that they were real professional football players.
That's amazing, for sure. And you list all the innovations, of course. The NFL eventually adopted the 2-point conversion. The AFL initiated official time on the scoreboard clock, player identification on uniforms. I won't read the entire list here on the website. But.
Right. And also even NFL Films, which is such a great moneymaker, got a lot of their innovation from AFL Films, which they just absorbed and subsumed and no longer exists, obviously, and they take the credit for it. It's as I say, don't get my dander up.
Sure. Well, now and it's interesting because again, we're an APBA club, so even that kind of disrespect or that kind of viewing the AFL as a little less than, even carried over into the rules of the game back then when the AFL teams were. Each player is assigned points, and the AFL teams got fewer points, and the rules were kind of lessened for them up until right around the merger, and around the time of the Jets and Chiefs victories. So, it's just. I
mean, it's still. I mean, it happens even today. I mean, there are players. I use Johnny Robinson as an example. He's finally in. Mm-hmm. He was better than defensive backs that are already in the Hall of Fame, and it took 40 years to get him in. Or 20, probably 30 years or so after he retired, because of the bias that was created then and exists until this day. And part of it is, if a sports writer wants to look up the history on professional football, if they find newspaper articles from the 60s that are written by William Wallace and Jerry Green and other NFL writers, all they have to read is stuff that puts down the AFL. So it goes on and on.
You know, it's interesting, and your bios are extensive and laden with AFL's fantastic stats, and so I have to go back and ask about those the Super Bowls that never were, starting with the 60-61 Oilers, the 62 Texans, 63 Chargers, and of course your 64 and 65 Bills. How would they have fared, do you think, against?
Well, you know, obviously I'm biased. I think that even the early years, okay, even the Houston Oilers, who won the first two AFL championships and almost won the third.
Yeah.
I think they could have given a fight. My argument always was the good teams in the AFL as good as the good teams in the NFL, and the bad teams were just as bad as the bad teams in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not going to say that the AFL would have won every Super Bowl if the one had started in 1960. I don't really believe that, but I think they would have given them a fight. I think it probably would have happened as it did with the ones when they finally played them. I think that the Chiefs and the Raiders, two things happened. One, they played probably one of the best teams, you know, of the era, that kicked the crap out of every other team in its own league. And two, you know, they were a little odd. I mean, this is Vince Lombardi and the Green Bay Packers that were playing. They almost believed the press clippings, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
And so I think that's why you saw those blowouts. Although there were blowouts within the NFL those same years, and nobody ever points to those and says that, you know, that they weren't worthy. So maybe the first two Super Bowls would have been blowouts, and then I think after that they would have been even up. I mean, I definitely think that the 63 Chargers would have beaten the 63 Bears. The Bears were 3 yards in a cloud of dust, mm-hmm. and I don't think they would have held down the Chargers offense. I really don't. So I think, like I say, probably from 63 on, or 62 or 63 on, I think you could have had an even bet on who was going to win those games. The Bills, the 2 years before the Super Bowl, 64 and 65, had a defensive team that didn't allow an offensive a rushing touchdown for 17 straight games. Wow. They had a linebacking crew of John Tracy and Mike Stratton and Harry Jacobs, who played, I think, 58 straight games together. It's still a pro football record. So I think the 64 and 65 Bills would have carried their weight in any game against the NFL. Again, they might not have won, but I think it would have been a fair game.
Sure. And obviously, I mean, the more you're exposed to another kind of leagues or another group's tactics and practices and all that, that certainly helps you kind of get over that hump and really become,
right.
And of course, the AFL, the recruiting toward the end of the decade became a major factor.
Right. I mean, that's what forced the merger and the recruiting and the going after players in the other leagues. A little known fact is that the NFL asked for the merger. Okay, the NFL owners went to Lamar Hunt behind Pete Rozelle's back and behind Al Davis's back and negotiated a merger. For whatever reason, they're the ones that wanted the merger. I wish Al Davis would have maintained control, and I think the face of pro football would have been a little different today if he had. Not that Al Davis was a saint.
Sure. Well, and I mean the animus between Al Davis and the NFL is legend. I mean, even going up to 1980, and they wouldn't let them.
Yes. Well, I really think a lot of it goes all the way back to the merger. When he essentially got kicked out. He was commissioner of the AFL, and yet the owners agreed to a merger with the enemy.
What was your take? It's interesting. There's a page called Ghost of the Orange Bowl. They do a great history of the stadium, and it was only a few days ago that the expansion Dolphins played their first preseason game against the Chiefs. What was your take on the emergence of the Dolphins in '66 and Bengals in '68? That was a good sign for the health of the league, right?
Well, yeah, I like the fact that we picked up two teams. It did have an effect on the league, and a negative effect as far as I was concerned, and that was, I thought the 8-team AFL was a perfect league because every team played every other team twice. Exactly. So there was no argument over, who had the best schedule, who deserved to be in the playoffs, etc. Every team played every other team twice. When the Bengals and the Dolphins came in, of course, that messed up the schedule. You didn't get to play every other team twice. But I was glad to see both teams in the league. Although I don't have the greatest love for Paul Brown, who after the fact, I realized that he got into the AFL because he saw it as a stepping stone back into the NFL. I think he disrespected the AFL in doing so. But I like to see the Dolphins' success, and even after the merger. Former AFL teams were still treated like AFL teams. Their players were still neglected for the Hall of Fame. Kenny Stabler, I think one reason it took him so long to get into the Hall of Fame, he was not an AFL player. I think he may have been a rookie in '69, but his career was an quote NFL career, but yet he had the quote unquote stigma of being in an AFL on an AFL team, and that's how he was thought of, even though the AFL was gone by that time.
Speaking of Stabler and the dreaded long ball of the Raiders, Cliff Branch, finally made his made it in, and I wondered if you might get a little more granular on the original 8 of the AFL and kind of categorize their style of play. What kind of differentiated them outside of what we generally hear about the vertical game?
The Texans Chiefs probably had the best all-around team in both ways, although they did not have a long game. Len Dawson made his bread and butter with the short passes, but they had a terrific defense. They probably in a just world you might have 3 or 4 more Chiefs in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if you know anything about how the Hall of Fame selectors work or how they think, but they resist putting a lot of guys from the same team in the Hall. Which to me shouldn't be a criterion. If a guy's a Hall of Famer, he's a Hall of Famer, whether he's on a poor team or a great team. So they had a great defensive team. The Bills, I think, had a terrific defense and a very good offense. Jack Kemp doesn't get the due he should. You look at his passing stats, and they might not be so great, but he was a terrific leader. Had a huge number of rushing touchdowns in the AFL. The Patriots, even though the Patriots were so-called patsies in those days, the Patriots were the Bills' strongest rival, and Cappelletti and Perilli were terrific ball players. Perilli was probably over the hill, but he was still good and a threat. And Cappelletti was an all-around player that, again, should be in the Hall of Fame, leading point scorer in the American Football League. How do you not put him in the Hall of Fame? The Oilers were better at the start of the league and towards the end of the league. Blanda, won 2 championships there. Charlie Hennigan, another one who the first receiver to catch he's the second receiver to catch 100 passes in a season. He broke Lionel Taylor's record. And Charlie Hennigan held pass reception records for 3 or 4 decades after he retired. He still had those records. So Houston had a great offense, as I say, at the beginning of the league. The Jets were sort of whipping boys, although bad as they may have been, they had several players who lasted from the first AFL year to win a Super Bowl. So, which I use as an argument to say, those first AFL teams had good players. I mean, maybe they didn't have 53 good players, but they had good players. Who am I missing? The Broncos were really the whipping boys of the league, but they too had highlight players. Lionel Taylor, again, who was the first to catch 100 yards in a season, 100 passes in a season, and is still kicking, and I think he's still coaching a high school football team. So it was a great time. It was a great time, and I'm glad that I was around to see it.
Well, and of course, you talk about excellence and how quickly the Dolphins and the Raiders rose to prominence within their first 6 years to dozen years. They clearly established some good practices there, to put it mildly. I'm curious what you think. Most of those teams have remained in their originating cities. Just curious about what your feeling was about the Chargers going back to L.A. and the Raiders leaving for.
Well, I hate it. Back after the leagues merged, or when the leagues merged, I attended some congressional hearings about the merger, and I remember Pete Rozelle telling Congress that a 50,000-seat stadium was adequate for professional football. And if they allowed the merger, and if teams could have a 50,000-seat stadium, that cities would not lose their franchises. And then they obviously quickly neglected to live up to that. And I didn't like it when Cleveland moved, even though they were an NFL team. I didn't like it when Baltimore moved. And I certainly don't like it when Oakland and the Chargers moved. Even though the Chargers went back to their original town and they had moved in the first place, I remember them as the San Diego Chargers, and they had their best success as San Diego Chargers in the AFL. Again, as big a fan as I am of pro football, I don't think that a community should build a stadium for a team. And I think that part of the problem is that our government leaders don't have backbones. The only reason that they get away with forcing one city to build a stadium is because there's some other city or state that will accept that team and build a stadium for them. And I think it's wrong. I think the Bills fans got it put to them this year when a new stadium was approved for the Bills. I don't like that, and I don't like the fact that they have the threat of moving if they don't get their way.
Well, I imagine that's a topic of conversation when you and Todd Tobias ever work together, speak. Todd runs Tales from the American Football League, so you've got good coverage here. I mean, you've got. And I know that the Facebook fans are incredibly diligent, and there's really, a very active group.
Yes.
I just wonder how you think the legacy of the AFL will endure as the NFL continues to grow here.
Well, I As I said, I'm surprised that it's as active as it is. I mean, it's probably just a few. I don't know how many people are really involved and really that hot about it. Todd, I know that Todd is brokenhearted over the loss of the Chargers. He wrote a book about the Chargers as well. As I say, I try to do what I can, but the NFL recognized the 50th anniversary of the AFL. They did not recognize the 60th. It was the 100th anniversary of the NFL, and so that was the big deal. And as time goes by, I think it'll get less and less ink, so to speak. And as far as Hall of Fame membership, there's probably not one selector in any city that actually ever saw an AFL game, and there's more good players coming along every year. So I think it's unlikely that you're going to see many more AFL players get into the Hall and much done about the AFL. I think they lost an opportunity when they eliminated the name AFL. I think they could have merged and they could have had an American Football League and a National Football League as members of Major League Football, just like baseball does. I think if they had done that, as big as the Super Bowl is, does anybody really care if the AFC or NFC wins the Super Bowl anymore?
I used to be an AFC guy, I must say, but
I think probably AFL fans, old AFL fans care, but in general, there just isn't that what's the word, rivalry that was there when there were two leagues.
Sure.
The Pro Bowl is laughable anymore. If there had been two leagues and there had been an All-Star game between the two leagues, it would be one more reason for pushing that rivalry. So I think that was lost when they decided to call it AFC and NFC instead of AFL and NFL. I also think that the AFL teams should wear a patch, okay? And that would help to keep the AFL alive, like the Chiefs patch, which is a permanent part of their uniform now. Why not have that patch on every former AFL team? And so the fans would know, and the players themselves would know that they're part of pro football history.
Well, and being obviously, the NFL is all about legacy, pro football generally, and I imagine even though you're a Bills fan, it was certainly a kind of a nice blow when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. It was 2019 against the Niners.
Well, again, if even today, okay, if there's a game between a former AFL team and an NFL team, and it doesn't affect the Bills, I root for the AFC team, the AFL team.
Sure.
I just do. Even the hated Patriots, okay, they kicked the hell out of us for 10 years now. When they were in the Super Bowl, I want them to win the Super Bowl. They're an AFC team. They're an AFL team. That's true. It's still true, and I think there are a lot of AFL, AFC fans that feel the same way.
What is it's interesting. You are you share your love of the Bills with Ken Crippen, who is the former director of the Pro Football Research Association, and he's got his Football Learning Academy out there now. What's your take on how the Bills are looking for 2022?
I think they look great, but they're looking great at the wrong time in pro football history. There's a lot of great young quarterbacks out there. There's a lot of good teams out there. I think we're very good. I see these predictions that say the Bills are the first choice for the Super Bowl, and that Josh Allen is a top quarterback. I like it. I'm a Bills fan, but I take everything with a grain of salt. And like I say, when you have a lot of good teams, anything can happen. We lost 4 straight Super Bowls. We had terrific teams. Those 4. I told my wife at the time, that was before free agency, I told my wife, you'll never see a team like this in Buffalo again. And we haven't, and we won't, because even if we win one Super Bowl, 3 or 4 of the players will decide to go someplace else. But it's a good team. But we got to beat San Diego. I'm sorry, Los Angeles. We got to beat Mahomes. And who knows? Anything can happen. As that damn game last year against the Chiefs proves, anything can happen.
Right. Now, you had mentioned when you were writing to the AFL owners and the NFL folks that you were proposing, if not a single championship game, but almost a championship series. How would you have envisioned that?
Well, the Canadian Football League, we're right across the border. I'm in Canada right now. The Canadian Football League at one time had a 2-game series for their championship game. Whoever got the most points in the 2 games won the championship. I was just thinking about something like that. 1 or 2. How about a 3-game series? I mean, of course, it's football. It's not like baseball, and it would take a lot out of the players. But I'm surprised the NFL hasn't thought about that. Let's have a 3-game Super Bowl. Wow, extend the season by 3 weeks, and have all that hoopla and all that money rolling in for an extra couple of weeks.
For sure. Outside of your wonderful website, what are some of your favorite books about the AFL? Or, I mentioned Full Color Football is a great series.
Well, there's The Other League, which was written by Jack Horrigan and Mike Rathett, which is I guess the Bible, to me, the Bible of the AFL, a very good book, which, by the way, has a roster of all American Football League teams, all American Football League players in it. So that's a classic. There's one on the Chiefs. I'm trying to think of the title. I'm not home, so I don't have the books in front of me. But there's one on the Chiefs after they won Super Bowl III. There's one called Touchdown, which was maybe from 1967 or 8, or maybe before the Super Bowl era, which has a lot of nice color photos of the AFL, which you didn't see a lot of. By the way, I once I had a little thing going with Sports Illustrated at one time too, because Sports Illustrated was the glossy magazine with all the wonderful NFL color photos in it, and if they ever mentioned the AFL, there was a black and white, a couple black and white shots there. So I once sent them a roll of color film. I also called them after the Jets won the Super Bowl, and I said, asked, is Tex Molly okay? He was a former L.A. Rams official who wound up being a sports writer, and he knocked the AFL, just brutally for years on Sports Illustrated. Anyway, so what other books? I'm having a hard time with titles. I remember the books, but I don't remember the titles. There's one, Going Long, is about a good book about the AFL. Another one is, I think it's just called the American Football League. It doesn't have photos. It's sort of a documentary description of what happened with the league. I do have an AFL reading list on my website. So if anybody's listening to you, they can look there to see the ones that I've read.
Excellent, sir. I'm looking also on the website. There's a memorabilia tab. Just wondering, what's your memorabilia collection like?
Well, we've really divested ourselves. As I say, I'm 86. I don't have any living heirs, so rather than having the stuff sit around and then I have my nephews and nieces throw it out when we're gone, we've gotten rid of a lot of stuff. So really, that website is sort of my memorabilia. I've got a lot of images My wife is as big an AFL fan, big a football fan and AFL fan as I am, and she has quite a collection of AFL Tops and Fleers football cards. And it's sort of a constant little thing among us because she'd like to divest of those as well. And I can't bear to let them go because every once in a while I'll scan a few more of them and use them on the website, etc. We have a full set of the Tall Boys, the Tops 1965 set, which is probably the most beautiful football card set that was ever made. So that's about all the memorabilia that we have. I also have plaques, hardboard plaques of every AFL team, except the Bills that I got at a flea market. And once I bought them, I realized that they had been made in Buffalo.
Nice.
The guy's no longer, in fact, made in Amherst, New York, where I live, about 3 blocks from where I live.
Wow.
And he's out of business. And I was forced to borrow one of them from a Buffalo plaque from somebody that has one, and I made a copy of it and sort of ginned up an artificial one. So those are the memorabilia that I still have, but I don't really have a lot anymore.
Sure. Understood. Sir, thank you so much, Ange. This has been a real pleasure. Thank you for your insights, and thank you for creating and maintaining RememberTheAFL.com. It's an incalculably valuable resource, particularly for us guys who go back and replay these seasons, and we indeed do remember the AFL. So thank you, sir.